Okay, just imagine this for a second. A country with over a billion people suddenly has a huge chunk of its energy supply just cut off. This isn't some hypothetical scenario, you know? It's a real-world crisis that forces a country to act and act fast. So in this explainer, we're going to look at exactly how India handled a sudden gas shock like this and what it really tells us about where its energy future is headed.
When you see an image like this, it's easy to just think, oh, pipes. But these are so much more than just tubes of metal. They're literally the arteries of the economy. This is the natural gas that heats our homes, fuels our cars and buses, keeps factories running. It even helps grow the food we eat. It's like the invisible engine that powers our daily lives.
So that brings us right to the heart of the matter. What actually happens when a nation's main energy tap is suddenly turned way, way down? How does a government make those incredibly tough calls about who gets fuel and who has to go without? Who wins, who loses, and how on earth do you stop the entire system from just grinding to a complete halt?
All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First up, we'll look at the crisis itself. What happened at this critical choke point? Then, we'll dive into the government's response, their gas prioritization plan. After that, we'll zoom in on a really big problem, the fertilizer dilemma. And finally, we'll pull back and see what all this means for India's dream of a gas-powered future.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The crisis at the choke point. And you've got to understand, this wasn't some slow-moving problem or a shortage people saw coming. Nope, this was a sudden, massive geopolitical shock, and it sent these immediate ripple effects through India's entire energy system, all starting thousands of miles away.
So the flashpoint here was a geopolitical conflict right in the Middle East. And what happened was an immediate halt to shipments of liquefied natural gas, you'll hear that called LNG, right through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you're not familiar, just think of the Strait of Hormuz as one of the most critical energy superhighways on the planet. When that gets shut down, believe me, the entire global economy feels the pain.
And for India specifically, well, the impact was absolutely huge. We're talking about the supplier, Qatar, which provides a staggering 40% of all of India's annual LNG imports. 40%. Just let that number sink in. To lose access to that much energy that fast, well, that's not just a problem. That is a full-blown national emergency.
So what happened next? Well, Qatar invoked a legal term you might have heard of, force majeure. Basically, you can think of it as an act of God clause in a contract. It means, hey, something happened that was totally out of our control, in this case the conflict, so we are legally off the hook for our end of the deal. For India, the bottom line was simple and brutal. The contracts were void, and the gas just wasn't coming.
So what do? 40% of your imported gas is just gone, overnight. How does a country even begin to respond to that? Well, the Indian government didn't waste any time. It didn't wait for things to get worse. It immediately pulled out its official playbook, a really swift and decisive plan to manage this massive shortage and basically create a new set of rules for national survival.
And this table, this is really the heart of the government's whole response. It's called the Natural Gas Supply Regulation Order. The best way to think about it is like an energy triage plan for the entire nation. Right at the top, you've got Priority Sector 1. This is the absolute essential stuff for daily life. Piped natural gas, or PNG for people's kitchens, and compressed natural gas, CNG, for buses and transport. Those are protected. They get 100% of their supply, no questions asked. A little further down, you see critical sectors like fertilizer plants getting 70% and other manufacturing getting 80%.
Now, obviously, to make sure those top priority sectors get their gas, somebody else has to take a hit, right? The gas has to come from somewhere. And that's where you see the cuts. The order targeted petrochemical facilities, power plants, and oil refineries. Their supply was slashed down to around 65% of what they normally use. And that's the tough trade-off you have to make in a crisis like this. To keep homes warm and buses running, you have to throttle back some of the huge industrial engines that power the economy.
And here's the really crucial part. This government order wasn't just a friendly suggestion. Oh no, this was a federal mandate. It had the power to instantly override every single private contract and gas sale agreement in the entire country. Just like that. In a state of emergency, the national interest came first, period.
Okay, to really get a grip on the real-world stakes here, we need to zoom in on one industry in particular, fertilizers. Because this isn't just some abstract industrial problem. We're talking about food security for over 1 billion people, and the financial fallout is just massive.
Just look at this number, 1.4 trillion rupees. That's a T for trillion.
And this was the government's subsidy bill for fertilizers in a recent fiscal year, before this big crisis even happened. That's around 19 billion US dollars. And that huge number is directly connected to the wild, fluctuating price of natural gas, which, you guessed it, is the main ingredient needed to make urea fertilizer.
And this quote from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis really hits the nail on the head. It says the tenfold rise in LNG prices in 2021 made the subsidy problem even worse. It's a direct connection. When global gas prices spike, it has a direct and really painful impact on India's national budget. The whole thing just explodes.
This right here shows you exactly why that subsidy is so gigantic. On one hand, the government makes sure farmers pay a fixed price for fertilizer, around $71 a ton. But on the global market, well, that same exact ton could cost almost $800. And the government, it has to pay the difference. It has to absorb that enormous gap.
And this chart really lays bare the core vulnerability. Look at that. The fertilizer industry gets almost 2/3 of its natural gas from imported LNG. So it's totally dependent on that expensive, unpredictable global market. And that's precisely what makes the whole sector, and the government's budget, so incredibly vulnerable to these global price shocks.
All right, so let's pull the camera back for a moment. This whole crisis didn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It hit right in the middle of India trying to pull off one of the most ambitious energy transitions anywhere in the world. And in that transition plan, natural gas is supposed to be one of the main heroes.
The government has this huge, ambitious goal. They want to get natural gas to make up 15% of the country's total energy mix by 2030. Now, that is more than double what it is right now. It's a massive leap, and the whole idea is to cut down on pollution and move away from coal and oil.
But here comes the reality check. This chart from the International Energy Agency tells a really interesting story. India has actually been down this road before. You can see the share of gas peaked way back in 2010, and then it actually fell. By 2022, it was sitting at just 6.4%. It just goes to show you, having a big ambition is one thing, but actually making it happen, especially when prices are all over the place, is a completely different ballgame.
But you know what? There's actually a blueprint for success right inside India. Just look at the state of Gujarat. The numbers here are pretty incredible. Gas makes up 25% of Gujarat's energy mix. Compare that to the national average of just 6.4%. How? Well, it has 60% of the entire country's capacity to import LNG, and a quarter of all its gas pipelines. So it absolutely proves that a gas-based economy isn't just a dream, it's possible in India.
So the big plan to take what Gujarat has done and scale it up for the whole country is this massive initiative called One Nation, One Gas Grid. And we are talking about a colossal infrastructure project here. The goal is to build out a seamless national pipeline network over 35,000 kilometers long to connect pretty much every corner of the country to a steady supply of gas.
And that all leaves us with one big final question, doesn't it? On one hand, India has the ambition. It has a proven model for success in Gujarat, and it has a massive infrastructure plan in motion. But this crisis we've been talking about is a pretty harsh reminder that this whole gas-powered dream is tied to a global energy market that's more volatile and unpredictable than ever before. So I guess the real question is, can India's grand plan, its national grid, be built strong enough to withstand the inevitable shocks from the global stage?